Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The gentle hum of the penthouse was a lie. A thin veneer of normalcy stretched over a foundation that had, just hours before, been utterly obliterated. The plush carpets and tasteful, expensive art absorbed no sound, least of all the echo of the words that had been spoken there. Words that had the force and finality of a tomb slamming shut. Victor Newman, a man who had built an empire on secrets and their strategic deployment, had finally been undone by one of his own. It was a secret so profound, so deeply buried in the bedrock of his past, that its exhumation felt less like a revelation and more like a seismic event, shifting the very geography of Genoa City and every life connected to his. He sat now, not in his customary throne-like chair behind the massive desk, but in a smaller, more vulnerable armchair, his posture still rigid with a lifetime of authority, yet his eyes, those famously piercing blue eyes, held a hollowed-out quality, as if the man inside had retreated to a great distance. The confrontation had been brutal, a cascade of accusations and evidence laid bare not by a corporate rival, but by his own family, the very people he had always claimed to protect with his machinations. The horror of the secret itself was one thing, a dark stain on his soul that he had learned to live with, even to ignore in the bright, unforgiving light of his success. But the horror of seeing it reflected in the eyes of his children, his wife, that was a punishment he had never conceived of, a unique torment that left him feeling strangely, terrifyingly frail. The secret itself was not a single monstrous act, but rather a corrosive series of choices, a path of destruction he had paved decades ago when his ambition was a rawer, hungrier thing. It involved a forgotten business partner from his earliest days, a man who had believed in Victor's vision and had invested not just capital, but his entire life into what would become Newman Enterprises. This man, whose name had been systematically erased from the company's official history, had been more than a partner. He was a friend, a confidant. And when a pivotal moment arrived, a moment where a decision had to be made that would either save the company or sink it, Victor had chosen. He had chosen to save the company. The specifics were complex, a web of financial maneuvers and legal technicalities, but the brutal truth was simple. Victor had fabricated evidence, had perjured himself in a sworn deposition, and had effectively stolen his partner's share, driving the man into bankruptcy and a profound, lasting disgrace. The public story, the one Victor had meticulously crafted and disseminated, painted the partner as incompetent, even criminally negligent. The truth, now laid bare, was that Victor had sacrificed his friend on the altar of his own ambition. The man, broken and vilified, had taken his own life mere months after the legal battle ended. A fact Victor had buried so deep he almost convinced himself it was an unfortunate coincidence, a tragedy unrelated to his own actions. This long-buried corpse of his past had been unearthed not by a corporate spy or a rival CEO, but by a whisper, a persistent rumor that had snaked its way through the city's underbelly for years, eventually reaching the ears of someone with both the motive and the means to investigate, Adam Newman. Victor's volatile, brilliant, and perpetually wounded son had always sensed the hidden layers of his father's history, feeling the weight of unspoken sins in the way Victor preached about family and loyalty. Adam, armed with a name and a fragment of an old court document discovered in a forgotten safe deposit box, had become a man possessed. His investigation was a quiet, relentless obsession, a digging into the past that felt like an archaeological excavation of his own fractured relationship with his father. He followed threads that led to dusty archives, to retired clerks who remembered the case with a vague unease, and finally, to the partner's sole surviving relative, a niece who had grown up with the family lore of her uncle's ruin at the hands of the great Victor Newman. She possessed a box of her own, filled with her uncle's personal diaries and letters, a heart-wrenching chronicle of his despair, and his unwavering belief that Victor had betrayed him. It was this human evidence, the raw, emotional account penned in the partner's own hand, that transformed the corporate crime into a profoundly personal tragedy. The revelation did not come in a lawyer's office or a boardroom. It came in the living room of the Newman Ranch, a place that had always been Victor's sanctuary, his fortress. The family had been gathered under a false pretense, a simple dinner that Victoria had hoped would ease the ever-present tensions. But Adam had other plans. He stood before them all, his face a mask of grim triumph and profound pain, and he laid it out piece by piece, not as a prosecutor would, but as a son exorcising a demon. He read excerpts from the diaries, his voice steady but laced with a tremor of rage. He presented the financial records, the contradictory statements, the evidence of the fraudulent transfer of shares. The room, once filled with the soft clinking of cutlery and the low murmur of polite conversation, fell into a silence so deep it was deafening. Victoria stared first at Adam, then at her father, her expression shifting from disbelief to a dawning, sickening comprehension. Nick sat back, running a hand over his face, the familiar pattern of his father's duplicity settling over him with a new heavier weight. But it was Nikki whose reaction cut the deepest. She looked at Victor, her husband of so many years, the man she had fought for and forgiven countless times, and in her eyes was not just anger, but a kind of shattered devastation. She had known the man was capable of many things, but this callous destruction of a friend, this hidden history of a death he had indirectly caused, this was a chasm of moral failure she had never imagined. Victor's initial reaction was one of towering, furious denial. He rose from his chair, his voice a thunderous roar, dismissing the evidence as forgery, the diaries as fiction, Adam's motives as a pathetic attempt to destabilize the family out of sheer malice. He was the great Victor Newman, and he would not be tried in his own home by his own illegitimate son. But the bluster was a shield, and a fragile one. With each new document Adam produced, with each damning entry he read aloud, the shield cracked. The certainty in Victor's eyes began to waver, replaced by a flicker of something that looked uncomfortably like panic. He could see the belief draining from the faces of his family. They had heard his denials before, had navigated the labyrinth of his lies for their entire lives, but this was different. The evidence was too concrete, the story too coherent, the pain of the long-dead partner too vividly rendered in his own words. The horror in the room was not just at the secret itself, but at the sheer, sustained deception its concealment required. It meant that every time Victor had spoken of integrity, every time he had lectured them on loyalty, it had been a performance. The foundation of their world, however fractured, had always been the unshakable, if often infuriating, figure of Victor. Now they saw that the figure was hollow, propped up by a terrible ancient sin. It was in the ensuing chaos, as voices were raised and accusations flew across the room, that the doorbell rang, an impossibly mundane sound in the midst of the emotional cataclysm. No one moved for a moment, trapped in the bubble of their shattered reality. It was Nikki, her composure held together by the thinnest of threads, who finally went to the door. Standing there were two detectives, their faces professionally neutral, their postures radiating an unwelcome officialdom. They asked for Victor Newman. They were polite, firm, and they had a warrant for his arrest. The charge was old, but the statute of limitations had been cleverly circumvented by framing it as a continuing pattern of fraud and obstruction of justice, charges that Adam, in his meticulous preparation, had already forwarded to the district attorney's office along with a mountain of evidence. The moment they stepped into the living room, the family conflict was instantly dwarfed by the cold, impartial machinery of the law. The detectives explained the charges in calm, legalese terms, but the words echoed in the silent room. Perjury, fraud, financial malfeasance. Victor listened, his face a granite mask, but the fight seemed to have gone out of him. The revelation before his family had been the true battle, and he had lost. This was merely the aftermath, the administrative conclusion. The arrest itself was a study in surreal humiliation. There was no dramatic struggle, no shouted declarations of innocence. Victor, with a dignity that seemed both admirable and deeply pathetic, simply nodded. He assured his stunned and weeping family that it was a misunderstanding, that his lawyers would have it cleared up by morning, but the words rang hollow even to his own ears. As one of the detectives guided his hands to be cuffed, a collective gasp went through the room. The sight of Victor Newman, the patriarch, the titan of industry, in handcuffs, was an image so fundamentally wrong it felt like a tear in the fabric of the universe. The cold, metallic click of the locks engaging was a sound that would haunt each of them for years to come, a definitive period placed at the end of the sentence of his invincibility. He was led out of his own home, past the gawking staff, and into the back of a waiting, unmarked sedan. The press, tipped off by an anonymous source, a final bitter twist of the knife likely engineered by Adam, were already there, their cameras flashing, capturing the unimaginable. Victor Newman being taken into custody. In the days that followed, the fallout was immediate and all-consuming. Newman Enterprises stock plummeted, triggering panic on the floor of the stock exchange, and sending the company's board of directors into emergency sessions that stretched late into the night. Victoria, now thrust into the role of acting CEO, fought to project an image of stability, but her own faith was shattered, and it showed in the new hesitation in her voice during press conferences. Nick retreated, grappling with a complex stew of anger, pity, and a reluctant sense of duty to the company that bore his name. Nikki, sequestered in the penthouse, was a ghost of her former self, her love for Victor warring with a profound sense of betrayal that threatened to swallow her whole. And Adam, the architect of it all, found his victory to be ashen and empty. He had wanted to expose his father, to knock him off his pedestal and force the family to see the man he truly was. He had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but the cost was the complete destruction of the family's fragile ecosystem. He had not just arrested his father, he had detonated a bomb at the very heart of the Newman dynasty, and he was now standing in the rubble, unsure of what, if anything, could ever be rebuilt. Victor, in a sterile holding cell, was a king dethroned. The other inmates looked at him with a mixture of awe and contempt, but he barely saw them. He was alone with the echoes of his past, with the ghost of the man he had destroyed. The power, the influence, the fear he commanded, it was all meaningless within the cold, concrete walls. His lawyers came and went, speaking of legal strategies, of motions to dismiss, of potential plea bargains, but their words seemed distant, abstract. The only thing that felt real was the memory of the look on Nikki's face. That was his punishment. Not the loss of his fortune, not the threat of prison, but the knowledge that the woman he loved now saw him as a monster. He had spent a lifetime building an empire, believing that his legacy would be measured in billions and corporate dominance. Now he saw that his true legacy was this: a trail of broken lives, a family in ruins, and a secret once horrific and hidden, now exposed to the world, forever defining him not as a titan, but as a criminal, a man who in the end was arrested not for what he had, but for who he was. The world kept turning, Genoa City buzzed with the scandal, but for Victor, time had stopped in that moment. The handcuffs clicked shut, the moment the horrific secret ceased to be a secret and became instead his epitaph. Rumors have been swirling in Genoa City for years that Victor Newman has walked dangerously close to the edge, but nothing could have prepared anyone for the stunning revelation now crashing through the lives of every major family in town. A secret so dark, so deeply buried, and so shockingly calculated is finally seeing the light of day. For decades, Victor has been known as the Mustache. Powerful, feared, respected, and impossible to defeat. He has survived corporate wars, medical crises, family betrayals, and criminal investigations. Yet this time the fallout is different. This time the truth comes at him from every direction, propelled by people he once believed he could manipulate or silence. It begins with a whisper, a stray document, a confession recorded years ago, a trail of evidence someone should have destroyed but didn't. Slowly, pieces of a puzzle start surfacing that point to Victor's involvement in something far more sinister than his usual brand of scheming. At first, even his harshest critics dismissed the rumor as another attempt to smear him. But the moment one of the most trusted investigative figures in town confirms that the allegation is real, everything changes. The storm breaks when Chance Chancellor, determined to do his job with integrity no matter the cost, connects the dots between a cold case and a previously sealed Newman Enterprises file. Initially, Chance doesn't want to believe what he's seeing. After all, his own family has long been intertwined with the Newmans. But as he digs further, he uncovers a disturbing timeline. Payments made to an off-the-grid operative, unexplained gaps in Victor's travel records, and a coded memo suggesting Victor orchestrated a cover-up of something horrific years ago. Chance knows the moment he confronts Victor, everything in his life will change. His relationships, his alliances, and possibly even his safety. But the truth matters more than loyalty, and he refuses to back down. When he brings the evidence to Christine Williams, she is stunned into silence, realizing that they may be holding the key to a scandal that could shatter Genoa City's most powerful dynasty. Christine warns him to be absolutely certain because if this goes public, their careers and their lives will never be the same. After double-checking every file, Chance takes a breath and says they have no choice. It's time. As word spreads privately among a handful of key players, the emotional shockwaves begin tearing through the Newman family. Nikki feels the dread immediately, sensing that Victor has been hiding something from her again, but she never imagined anything on this scale. Victoria, despite her complicated relationship with her father, is torn between protecting the Newman legacy and acknowledging the magnitude of the evidence. Nick, always the moral compass of the family, questions how much more destruction can result from covering up for Victor. Each one feels the weight differently. Fear, anger, disbelief, and sorrow mixing in ways none of them expected. Meanwhile, Adam, who has committed his own share of unforgivable acts, is rocked by the idea that Victor may have kept this secret even from him. Adam knows better than anyone what Victor is capable of, but even he views this as a line Victor should never have crossed. Still, a small part of Adam wonders whether he should protect his father or expose him, knowing both choices come with consequences he may regret forever. When the confrontation finally arrives, Victor stands in his office at Newman Enterprises, projecting the same unshakable control he always has. But the second chance walks in with Christine at his side. Victor's expression shifts subtly, just enough to signal that he knows exactly what this is about. Nikki arrives moments later, followed by Nick and Victoria, drawn by the urgent messages they receive telling them to come immediately. The tension is suffocating as Chance lays the evidence on the table, each document hitting like a thunderclap. Victor reads every page with a calmness that unnerves everyone, but his eyes flicker with something sharp: recognition, memory, guilt, or strategizing. No one knows. Christine tells Victor he has the right to speak, but she warns that the situation is grave. Silence hangs in the room until Victor finally sets the papers down and looks at his family. In that moment, his face carries more weight than anyone has ever seen. Part pride, part defiance, and part sorrow. Instead of denying the accusations, he gives a measured explanation that only deepens the mystery. Victor admits that he did what needed to be done to protect someone he loved, and that he would do it again. The lack of remorse sends Nikki into tears, while Nick's hands curl into fists. Victoria's face drains of color. Adam, however, watches his father with a complicated blend of admiration and dread. The horrific secret that Victor buried is linked to a past incident involving a dangerous individual whose actions nearly destroyed someone close to the Newmans. Rather than allow justice to play out through legal channels, Victor allegedly arranged for the person to be eliminated, quietly, permanently, and without leaving a trace. The revelation hits the room like a bomb. Nikki recoils, horrified that Victor would take matters that far. She has always known Victor to be ruthless, but this crosses into something she cannot rationalize or morally defend. Nick looks disgusted, questioning whether his father has finally lost the line between protection and cruelty. Victoria feels betrayed that she has spent her entire life defending her father's decisions only to discover he may have committed the one act she could never justify. Meanwhile, Adam absorbs the revelation with an intensity that makes everyone nervous. If Victor is arrested, the entire Newman empire could collapse, leaving Adam to face either an opportunity or a nightmare. Authorities step in faster than expected because the evidence is overwhelming and the public interest is too great to ignore. Chance, doing the job he was sworn to do, reads Victor his rights. The moment feels surreal. The great Victor Newman, a man who has outplayed, outsmarted, and intimidated nearly every adversary he has ever faced, stands silent as handcuffs are placed on him. Nikki tries to reach for his arm but pulls back, unsure whether to comfort him or distance herself from the monster she fears he may have become. Victor, for his part, walks with dignity, refusing to allow anyone to see fear or regret in his expression. As he passes Adam, their eyes lock in a charged moment neither of them dares interpret out loud. Adam sees a father who expects loyalty even now. Victor sees a son who could either save him or destroy the family. The entire Newman world is shaking. Once Victor is booked, the media explodes with coverage. Genoa City is electrified with speculation, disbelief, and outrage. Newman Enterprises stock plummets within hours, sending the corporate board into panic. Rivals like Jack Abbott watch cautiously, knowing that the Newman downfall could shift the balance of power in the business world dramatically. Phyllis, never one to resist a moment of chaos, tries to gather information she could use to her advantage, while Sharon, always the emotional anchor in Nick's life, becomes someone he turns to as he tries to process the unimaginable. Every character in town is affected because Victor's arrest is more than a scandal. It's a seismic shift in the hierarchy of Genoa City. For years, Victor operated as an indestructible force, and now the idea of him facing prison time feels surreal. But the legal case is strong, and Christine makes it clear she intends to pursue it to the fullest extent, refusing to bend just because of the Newman influence. Meanwhile, the Newman family implodes under the pressure. Nikki spirals emotionally, blaming herself for not stopping Victor sooner or recognizing the signs that he was hiding something catastrophic. Victoria struggles to maintain control of the company, but every move she makes is overshadowed by the scandal. Nick becomes his mother's protector, trying to hold the family together while also wrestling with his anger toward Victor. Adam, however, becomes a wild card. Some characters believe he will seize the opportunity to claim power within Newman Enterprises, while others think he will mastermind a plan to get his father released. Adam insists he is loyal to Victor, but even he doesn't know whether he's capable of sacrificing everything to save the man who has hurt him so many times. The tension within the family grows worse as long-buried grievances resurface, and each member faces their own moral reckoning. Victor, sitting in a cell, remains impossibly calm. His lawyers visit him constantly, but he refuses to reveal the full truth about what happened. He says only that he acted to protect someone and he will not name who. This raises even more questions.